Valerie had grown used to cruel words, but when Richard sneered them across the auction pit loud enough for every pack leader bidding on her to hear, she didn't flinch, didn't shrink. She simply steadied her breathing and kept her eyes forward, even as the iron chains bit into her wrists and the torchlight made the tears in her dress glaringly obvious. Because Richard had no idea what she knew. He didn't know that the towering alpha standing motionless in the shadows of the gallery wasn't just another spectator. He didn't know that James Hood, the most feared ruler in all the territories, had been searching through every pack for months, hunting for the Omega who'd saved his life. He didn't know that the Alpha King's eyes burned red with barely contained fury, his hands already beginning to smoke as he decided exactly how he would make them all pay for putting her in chains. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This story begins 6 months earlier, on the night Valerie's world fell apart. The same night that would lead her into the forest with nothing but betrayal burning in her chest. The night everything changed. The cottage Valerie had called home smelled of lavender and lies. She stood in the doorway, arms full of market supplies, frozen by the voices drifting from inside, Richard's voice and the pack elders. "The debt is considerable," Elder Marcus said. "You're certain about this arrangement?" "She's an Omega." Richard's voice was casual, dismissive. "No special bloodline, no particular skills, but she's young enough, healthy enough. Someone at the auction will pay." The bags slipped from Valerie's hands, vegetables rolling across the threshold. "And if she objects?" another elder asked. Richard laughed, that cold sound she'd mistaken for humor during their courtship. "She won't. Valerie does what she's told. Always has. It's why I chose her in the first place. Compliant, easy, useful for clearing debts." The word hit like a physical blow. Valerie pushed the door open. Richard's face showed only mild annoyance, like she was a child interrupting important business. "Valerie, you're back early." "You're selling me." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant, hollow. "You're selling me to clear your gambling debts?" "Our debts," Richard corrected smoothly, standing to face her. "This is a pack matter, a financial solution. You'd understand if you weren't being so emotional." "I'm not property." Elder Marcus consulted his papers with bureaucratic indifference. "Actually, by pack law, an unmated Omega's fate falls to her alpha and betrothed. Technically speaking, technically, I own you," Richard finished, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Be grateful I found buyers willing to bid at all. You weren't exactly bringing value otherwise." Something inside Valerie cracked. Her wolf stirred, that part of herself she'd kept quiet and small for so long, and growled low in her chest. "I won't go." Richard's expression hardened, the mask of civility finally dropping. "You don't have a choice, Valerie. The auction is in 2 days. The contract is already signed." She ran, burst through the door and into the night, her feet pounding against packed earth as shouts erupted behind her. She made it 3 blocks before pack guards caught her, their hands rough as they dragged her backward. "No, let me go!" She fought, clawed, bit, everything her Omega training had taught her never to do. It didn't matter. They brought her before the pack alpha, the man who'd known her since childhood, who'd blessed her betrothal to Richard, who now looked at her with cold indifference. "Restrain her," he ordered. "The auction is in 2 days. She'll bring a better price undamaged." They locked her in the holding cells beneath the pack house, iron chains meant for rogues biting into her wrists, the same chains that would bind her at auction. Valerie screamed until her voice gave out. Then she waited in the darkness, wondering if this was how her story ended. Midnight brought chaos. Alarms blared throughout the pack house, something about an attack on the eastern border, guards needed immediately. In the confusion, a young guard fumbled his keys. They clattered to the floor just outside her cell. Valerie's fingers closed around them through the bars. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She unlocked the chains, crept past the distracted guards, and ran into the forest. This time, no one followed. The wild borders between territories smelt of pine and fear. Valerie had been running for hours, branches tearing at her skin, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the frozen air. Winter had come early to the borderlands, and ice crystals formed on her torn dress. She stumbled over a root and collapsed against a tree, her legs finally giving out. "I'm going to die out here," she thought distantly. Frozen, alone, free. At least she'd die on her own terms. Then she heard it, labored breathing, somewhere nearby. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden, to conserve what little warmth she had left. But curiosity, or perhaps fate, pulled her forward. She crawled toward the sound. He lay in a hollow between the roots of a massive pine, blood staining the snow black around him. Deep claw marks raked across his chest. A silver blade jutted from his shoulder, the kind specifically forged to kill shifters, to poison their healing. Even dying, he radiated power. His eyes opened, burning, intense, inhuman, and locked onto her face. "Run," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel. "They're hunting me. You need to run." Voices echoed through the trees, harsh, close, searching. "Find the body. The contract isn't complete until we have proof. The Alpha Cane doesn't die that easily. Keep searching." Panic seized Valerie's chest, but her body moved on instinct. She threw herself over him, pulling her dark cloak across them both, pressing her body against his to hide him from view. "Don't move," she breathed against his ear, feeling his blood soak warm through her dress. "Don't make a sound." Footsteps crunched through the snow. Heavy boots passed within feet of their hiding spot, so close she could smell the silver on their weapons, the violence in their intent. He couldn't have gone far with those wounds. Maybe he crawled into a den to die. We'll find him at first light. We better. The people who hired us don't accept failure. The voices faded into the distance. Valerie waited until silence returned, until her own heartbeat slowed enough to hear the forest again. Only then did she pull back. The stranger's eyes were fixed on her face, confusion and something like wonder swimming in their depths. "Why?" he asked. "You don't know me. You gain nothing from this. Why risk your life?" Valerie thought about the cell, about Richard's casual cruelty, about being called property, worthless, disposable. "Because no one deserves to die alone," she said quietly. She began examining his wounds with shaking hands. Her pack had trained every female in basic healing. Omegas were expected to tend injuries during conflicts. She'd hated those lessons then. Now they might save a life. "These are bad," she murmured, pulling the silver blade free as carefully as she could. He hissed in pain but didn't cry out. "I don't know if I can—" "You already saved me." His hands caught hers, surprisingly gentle despite his obvious pain. "What's your name?" "Valerie." "Valerie." He repeated it like a prayer, like something precious he wanted to remember. "I won't forget this. I won't forget you." She worked through the night with herbs from her pocket, the same herbs she'd bought at market a lifetime ago, and torn strips of her dress. She packed his wounds, whispered old healing words her mother had taught her, and tried not to think about how much blood he'd already lost. He drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time he woke, his eyes found hers. At dawn, different voices echoed through the forest. These ones called with concern rather than malice, searching with loyalty rather than greed. "Your Majesty, can you hear us? The Alpha King must be here somewhere." The stranger's eyes flickered open. "My people," he whispered. "They're searching for me." "Then you'll be safe." Valerie stood on trembling legs, preparing to slip away before they found her, before questions could be asked. "They'll get you proper help." His hand shot out, catching her wrist with more strength than should have been possible given his condition.
Come with me. Let me repay this. Let me protect you. I can't. She pulled away gently, already backing into the forest. I have my own problems, my own pack hunting me, but I'm glad you'll live. Then I will find you. His voice strengthened with absolute certainty, with a promise that sounded almost like a vow. I swear it, Valerie. If I live, I will find you, and when I do, I will make sure no one ever hurts you again. It was a beautiful promise, a dying man's fever dream. Valerie smiled sadly. Sure, if you live. She disappeared into the trees before his people arrived, moving silently through the snow-covered forest as voices of relief erupted behind her. She heard them find him, heard their joy at discovering him alive. She never looked back. She never learned his name, and she never believed she'd see him again, because fairy tales didn't happen to girls who'd been sold at auction. The months that followed blurred together like a nightmare Valerie couldn't wake up from. She moved through the territories like a ghost, never staying anywhere longer than a few days. Packlands were dangerous. Her own pack had sent trackers, and Richard had posted notices offering rewards for her return. Runaway Omega, answers to Valerie Vale, return for compensation. Like she was a lost dog. She survived in the spaces between, the wild borderlands where pack law didn't reach, where rogues and outcasts carved out desperate existences. She learned to hunt, to hide, to trust no one. And every night, when exhaustion finally claimed her, she dreamed of burning eyes and impossible promises. I will find you. She told herself it meant nothing, that the stranger had probably died despite her efforts, or had forgotten her the moment his people carried him to safety. But sometimes, in her darkest moments, she let herself imagine it was true. 6 months passed, and then the trackers finally found her.
The auction house reeked of smoke and greed. Valerie stood chained in the center of the pit, iron biting into her wrists as torchlight cast dancing shadows across her face. Pack leaders circled like vultures, their eyes assessing her worth the way one might evaluate livestock. Lot 47, the auctioneer droned. Omega, age 23. No bloodline of note. Previously engaged. Richard stood at the edge of the platform, his arms crossed, that familiar sneer twisting his lips. The same expression he'd worn when he'd signed her sale contract 6 months ago. Damaged goods, he announced loudly, making sure every bidder heard. Start the bidding low. She's been living rough, half-starved, probably diseased. Consider it charity. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Valerie had grown used to cruel words. She'd survived 6 months of running, hiding, being hunted. 6 months of believing that night in the forest had been nothing but a fever dream. She didn't flinch at Richard's words, didn't beg. She simply kept breathing, kept her chin lifted, even as despair threatened to crush her. This was how her story ended, sold to the highest bidder. Do I hear 50 silver? The auctioneer called. 40, someone countered. She looks like she hasn't eaten in weeks. 30, and that's generous. Richard smiled, satisfied. The bidding continued, voices haggling over her price like she was furniture to be liquidated. And then, the temperature in the room dropped. Every wolf in the auction house felt it, that primal, bone-deep recognition of power, of dominance so absolute it made alphas bow and omegas whimper. Valerie's head snapped up. In the shadows of the upper gallery, a figure stood, tall, motionless, eyes burning red in the darkness like dying stars. Her breath caught. No, it can't be. Going once? The auctioneer called, oblivious to the shift in the room. Going twice? The doors exploded inward. Fire flooded the hall, roaring through the entrance like a living thing. The torches guttered out, plunging the room into chaos lit only by flames. Wolves scattered, screaming. The auctioneer dove for cover. Through the inferno, a figure walked. James Hood stepped into the auction house like an avenging god, power radiating from him in waves that made the air itself tremble.
His eyes, those impossible, burning eyes from the forest, locked onto Valerie with an intensity that stole her breath. Then they shifted to Richard and promised murder. "You," James said, his voice carrying over the screams despite its quiet fury. "You made a grave mistake." Richard's face went white as recognition dawned. The Alpha King, the most feared ruler in all the territories, the man whose assassination had failed 6 months ago, the man Valerie had saved. James moved with lethal calm through the panicking crowd, wolves throwing themselves out of his path. He reached the auctioneer first, the man who'd been about to sell Valerie to the highest bidder. "This auction," James said, his hand closing around the auctioneer's throat, "is illegal under high pack law. Any wolf who sells another without consent forfeits their life." Fire consumes the auctioneer before he could scream. The Alpha Pack Alpha who'd authorized Valerie's sale stumbled forward, hands raised in supplication. "Your Majesty, we didn't know. We never intended offense." James's hand shot out. The Alpha's neck snapped with a sickening crack. Bidders scrambled for the exits, but guards in the Alpha King's colors had already sealed them. No one was leaving. Not yet. James crossed the pit in 3 strides, his eyes never leaving Valerie's face. Up close, she could see the recognition burning there, the same intensity from that night in the forest, but now backed by absolute authority and barely restrained rage. He knelt before her, an Alpha King, on his knees. His hands, impossibly gentle, closed around the iron chains binding her wrists. They shattered like glass. "I told you I'd find you," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears as he wrapped his cloak around her trembling shoulders. It smelled of smoke and pine and safety. "I told you I'd make sure no one ever hurt you again." Valerie's voice came out as barely a whisper. You're the Alpha King." "I'm the man whose life you saved." His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "And no one will ever touch you again. I swear it." "She's damaged goods," Richard's voice cut through the moment, desperate and shrill. "She's worthless, a runaway Omega with no pack, no value. You can't possibly want." James rose, turning to face Richard with eyes that promised suffering. "Worthless?" The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the stone floor. "She's worth more than your entire bloodline. She saved my life when she had every reason to run. She showed mercy to a dying stranger. She is brave and compassionate and stronger than you will ever comprehend." His hand moved to Valerie's shoulder, and she felt it, power flowing through his touch, marking her in a way every shifter in the room could sense, claimed, protected, his. "She bears my mark now," James announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "She is under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me." Richard's face drained of all color. No, she's mine. We had a contract." James smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Valerie had ever seen. "You'll suffer longer alive. Consider that mercy, the only mercy you'll ever receive from me." He turned back to the crowd, his voice amplifying until it shook the rafters. "I am James Hood, Alpha King of the territories. This pack committed treason against high pack law. You will answer for your crimes, all of you." Fire erupted along the walls, not to kill, but to trap, to corner, to mark them all for judgment. Valerie's legs fell out. James caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair, his voice gentle again. "You're safe now, I promise. I keep my promises." The last thing Valerie saw before exhaustion and shock claimed her was his face above hers, those burning eyes full of something that looked almost like reverence, and flames consuming everything behind them as he carried her out of hell and into a future she'd never dared to imagine. Valerie woke to silk sheets and sunlight, luxuries she hadn't felt in months. The room was enormous, furnished with dark wood and soft furs. Through arched windows, she glimpsed stone battlements and endless forest stretching to the horizon. A fortress. His fortress. The door opened with careful quietness, as if whoever entered didn't want to startle her. James stepped inside, and despite his immense power, he moved carefully, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. "You're awake." Relief flooded his features, softening the hard edges that made him legendary. "How do you feel?" Confused, Valerie pulled the silk blankets closer, suddenly aware of the clean nightgowns someone had dressed her in, of her washed hair and bandaged wrists. "Why am I here? What do you want from me?" "Want?" He stopped mid-step, genuine confusion crossing his face. "Valerie, you saved my life. I've been searching every territory for 6 months trying to find you." 6 months? The words felt impossible. An alpha king searching for her? But you have kingdoms to run, wars to fight, politics to manage. Why would you— "Because our bond awakens that night," he said it simply, like it was explaining everything, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "When you shielded me with your body, when you chose mercy over fear, when you risked your life for a stranger, something connected between us. I felt it. I know you did too." She had. That strange pull, that warmth when their hands touched, the way his eyes haunted her dreams. She'd told herself it was nothing, imagination, desperation. "I'm no one," Valerie whispered, the old shame creeping back. "I'm just an omega with no pack, no family, no value. I was sold for 30 silver. I'm—" James crossed the room in 2 strides and dropped to his knees before her bed. An alpha king. On his knees. His hands, impossibly gentle, closed around the iron chains binding her wrists. They shattered like glass. "You are the woman who saved my life when you had every reason to run," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are brave, kind, and stronger than you know. You survived betrayal, survived months alone in the wild, survived an auction designed to break you, and you're still here, still fighting. You are not nothing, Valerie. You never were." Tears burned her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this, like she mattered, like she was more than disposable. "I don't understand this, any of it. You could have anyone, powerful alphas, political alliances, wolves with bloodlines and titles. Why me?" "I don't want bloodlines or titles." His hand reached out slowly, stopping just short of touching her, asking permission with his eyes. "I want the woman who saw me at my weakest and chose compassion, who had nothing and still gave everything. If you'll have me." Valerie's breath caught. No one had ever asked her what she wanted, not
Once in her entire life. Decisions had always been made for her, about her, without her. "I'm afraid," she whispered, "of this power, of disappointing you, of being just a symbol, a pretty story about mercy that looks good but means nothing." "Then let me prove otherwise." James' thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle as prayer. "No claims, no pressure, no expectations, just time. Let me show you that what I feel is real, that you're not a symbol, you're Valerie, and that's all I want you to be." Something in her chest loosened, warmed. That frozen part of her that had learned not to hope began to thaw. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finding me, for keeping your promise, for—" Her voice broke. "For making me feel like I matter." James's smile transformed his entire face, softening the legendary Alpha King into something almost vulnerable. "You've always mattered. I'm just sorry it took you so long to see it." A sharp knock shattered the moment. A guard entered, his expression grim and apologetic. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's urgent news from the capital." "What is it?" James stood, authority sliding back over him like armor. "Claudia has returned to court. She's demanding an audience with you." The guard hesitated. "She claims she's still your legal mate under the ancient covenant, and that pack law forbids you from choosing another while she lives."
James's expression went cold as stone. Valerie's stomach dropped, ice flooding her veins. Who's Claudia? James closed his eyes, his jaw clenching. My past. My mistake. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with something that looked like regret and determination. And, apparently, my present problem.
Claudia was beautiful the way winter was beautiful, cold, sharp, and deadly. She swept into the throne room like she'd never left, her silver gown trailing behind her, her chin lifted with the confidence of someone who knew her power. Every eye in the room tracked her movement, except James's. His gaze remained fixed ahead, his jaw clenched tight. My king. Claudia's voice dripped honey and poison in equal measure. It's been too long. Not long enough, James said flatly. She smiled, undeterred. I've come to reclaim what's mine. Our mate bond was never formally dissolved. Under pack law, I am still your Luna. Murmurs rippled through the assembled council. Valerie, standing beside James's throne, felt her stomach drop. That bond was broken when you betrayed me, James said, each word sharp as a blade. Betrayal is a matter of perspective. Claudia's eyes finally landed on Valerie, assessing, dismissing. And who is this? Your companion? Valerie is under my protection. How sweet. Claudia's smile never reached her eyes. A charity case. You always did have a soft spot for strays. She turned to address the council. Surely you don't intend to replace your sworn mates with a packless Omega. What message does that send? It sends the message that I choose my fate, James growled. Do you? Claudia pulled a scroll from her sleeve, because, according to the ancient covenant, witnessed by 5 elders and sealed in blood, our bond cannot be dissolved without mutual consent or death. I'm very much alive, my king, and I do not consent. The head counselor cleared his throat. Your Majesty, she's technically correct. The law is clear. James rose from his throne, power crackling in the air. Then the law will change. Law doesn't change overnight. Claudia examined her nails, casual and cruel. In the meantime, I believe protocol demands I resume my position, unless you'd like to explain to the territories why you're housing an Omega in the Luna's quarters while your legal mate sleeps in the guest wing. Valerie felt every eye turn to her, judging, calculating, finding her wanting. This meeting is over, James declared. Claudia, you will be housed appropriately. Valerie stays where she is. For now, Claudia said sweetly, but councils convene, my king, laws are upheld, and temporary arrangements have a way of resolving themselves. Later that night, Valerie walked the fortress halls, unable to sleep. Voices drifted from a shadowed alcove, Claudia's voice and others. The Omega has no claim, no bloodline, no political value. The king seems quite attached. Attachment fades, especially when the council reminds him of his duty. There are laws against elevating Omegas to Luna, ancient laws. We simply need to resurrect them. And if he refuses, then we make her so uncomfortable she runs. Girls like that always run eventually. Valerie's fists clenched. Her old fear clawed at her chest, the urge to flee, to hide, to disappear before they could dispose of her. But she'd run before, she'd hidden before, and it had gotten her sold at auction. She turned back toward James's quarters, her spine straight, her jaw set. Not this time. This time she'd fight. The great council chamber was carved from black stone, designed to dwarf those who stood before it. 12 elders sat in judgment, their faces carved from centuries of tradition and law. Valerie stood in the center, alone. James sat upon the high throne, forced by protocol to remain impartial during testimony. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly the wood cracked. honored elders, I come before you to uphold sacred law. The Alpha King and I were bound under the ancient covenant. That bond remains unbroken, yet he seeks to elevate a packless Omega to Luna, a violation of every precedent." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. "I have evidence of this Omega's unsuitability." The doors opened, Richard walked in, and Valerie's blood turned to ice. This man was her betrothed. He can speak to her character. Richard's smile was poison. Valerie Vale was sold at auction 6 months ago. Damaged goods. No wolf wanted her. She was bid down to 30 silver pieces. She's weak, worthless, a burden to any pack foolish enough to claim her. Laughter echoed through the chamber. Valerie's hands trembled. The old shame threatened to drown her, to pull her back into silence. An elder leaned forward. "Is this true, girl? Were you auctioned?" Every instinct screamed to lie, to hide, to run. Instead, she lifted her chin. "Yes." Gasps, whispers. "I was sold by my pack to clear gets, chained and displayed like property." Her voice strengthened. "But that doesn't make me worthless. It makes them monsters." "Monsters?" Richard sneered. "You were a burden." "I was a person." Valerie's voice cracked like thunder. "I survived your betrayal, survived 6 months alone in the wild, survived because I refused to believe that my value is determined by wolves like you." Silence. James rose from his throne. Protocol be damned. "Enough." His voice shook the chamber. "You want to know why I choose her? Because when I was bleeding out in the forest, hunted by assassins, this woman, this supposedly worthless Omega, covered me with her body. She saved my life when she had every reason to run." The elders froze. Our bond awakened that night, not through politics or arrangement, but through her courage, her compassion, her strength. He reached Valerie, standing beside her. "She is more worthy than any of you." Claudia's face twisted with rage. "You cannot simply ignore centuries of law." "Then change the law," James roared, "because I will not abandon the woman who saved me to satisfy your ambition." The head counselor rose slowly. "Your Majesty, this testimony requires consideration. We will deliberate and deliver our verdict at dawn." "Dawn?" James's eyes flared red. "You would leave her fate uncertain while you debate?" "The law requires deliberation, Your Majesty, even for kings." The chamber erupted into chaos. Elders arguing, Claudia shouting, Richard protesting. Valerie stood at the center of it all, no longer alone. James's hand found hers and held tight.
Dawn never came. Instead, James Hood delivered his judgment under a sky choked with smoke. The traitor pack's territory burned. Valerie stood on the fortress balcony, watching orange flames devour the lands that had sold her. James stood beside her, his hand resting at the small of her back, a gesture of support, not ownership. Below, in the courtyard, the pack's leaders knelt in chains. "You sold a living soul to settle debts," James's voice carried across the assembled crowd. "You trafficked in flesh and called it legal. You are a stain upon every pack that upholds honor." The former Alpha tried to speak. Fire consumed his words before they could form. "Your titles are stripped, your lands forfeit, your pack dissolved." James's eyes burned red. "You are nothing, and nothing is all you'll ever be." Guards dragged them away, not to execution, but to something worse, exile, stripped of their wolves, cast out as humans into the wild they'd once ruled. A fate worse than death for any shifter. Then Richard was brought forward. He looked smaller now, stripped of his arrogance, trembling before the Alpha King's judgment. "You called her damaged," James said quietly, dangerously. "You called her worthless. You sold the woman who showed me mercy when I had none." "Please," Richard's voice broke. "I didn't know she was yours. I never meant—" You meant every word. James descended the steps slowly. And now you'll spend the rest of your very short life regretting them. Richard screamed as James's power wrapped around him, not killing, but marking. Every wolf who saw him would know his shame, would smell his betrayal, would turn him away. He'd live, but he'd live alone, despised, forgotten. Take him away. As Richard was dragged off, Claudia stepped forward. Her composure had cracked, desperation leaking through. "James, please, we had something once." "We had an arrangement," James corrected coldly. "One you abandoned the moment it no longer served you. You left me for dead, Claudia. You chose power over loyalty." "The council will never accept—" "The council accepts what I tell them to accept." James pulled a ceremonial blade from his belt. "I break this bond. By blood, by fire, by will, I sever what once was." He drew the blade across his palm. Power exploded outward, visible even to human eyes, a golden thread snapping between them. Claudia gasped, stumbling backward. "You can't! The ancient covenant—" "Is broken." James's voice rang with absolute authority. "I am Alpha King. My word is law, and I choose her." He turned to Valerie, his bloodied hand extended. "If you'll have me." Valerie stepped forward, her own hand steady as she placed it in his. Their blood mingled, and power surged, not violent like before, but warm, right, complete. The crowd fell silent. "Valerie Vale," James announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard, "is my chosen mate, my Luna, and anyone who questions this answers to me." No one spoke. No one dared. Valerie looked out over the burning territory, over the kneeling traitors, over the crowd of witnesses. She was no longer the girl sold at auction. She was the woman an Alpha King had burned kingdoms for, and she was not afraid. The great assembly gathered under a sky cleared of smoke. Every pack in the territory sent their leaders, alphas who'd ruled for centuries, elders who'd witnessed kingdoms rise and fall. They came to witness what no one had thought possible, an Alpha King kneeling before an Omega. James Hood descended from his throne, crossing the stone platform to where Valerie stood. The entire assembly held its breath. He dropped to one knee. "6 months ago, you saved my life when you had nothing to gain. You showed me mercy when the world had shown you none. You chose compassion over fear, courage over survival." Valerie's heart thundered in her chest. "I don't ask this as a king." James pulled a silver crown from his cloak, delicate, beautiful, deadly. "I ask as the man whose life you saved, as the man who's been searching for you ever since. Will you stand beside me, not beneath me, but as my equal, my Luna, my mate, my queen?" The old Valerie would have been too afraid to answer, too convinced of her unworthiness, but she wasn't that girl anymore. "I accept," Valerie said clearly, "on one condition." James' lips quirked. "Name it." "We rule together. No more councils deciding my fate. No more laws that treat Omegas as property. If I'm your Luna, we change everything." James's smile was fierce and proud. Done. He rose, lifting the crown. Power thrummed through the air as he placed it on her head, and the mating mark blazed to life on her neck, visible to every wolf present. A bond forged not through politics or tradition, but through choice, through love. The assembly erupted, some in celebration, some in shock, but all in acknowledgement. Valerie turned to face them, these wolves who'd once looked through her like she was nothing. She stood tall, crowned and claimed, beside the most powerful shifter in all the territories. James took her hand, threading their fingers together. "They tried to auction you off as trash," he murmured just for her. "They had no idea what you were." Valerie smiled, remembering chains and torchlight and Richard's sneer. remembering how far she'd come from that pit. "What am I?" she asked softly. James lifted their joined hands, displaying them to the assembled packs. His eyes blazed with fire and devotion and unshakable certainty. "Destiny," he said. "You were always destiny." And as the crowd bowed before their new Luna Queen, Valerie understood the truth. She was never trash. She was a queen waiting for her kingdom to burn down so she could rise from the ashes. The end. She was sold, she was saved, she was crowned. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a king can do is choose the woman everyone else threw away.